Welcome to the Project Endure podcast, the place where we talk about life, endurance, persistence, perspective, and so much more. I'm Joe Rinaldi, and I'll be your host. Let's jump in. Welcome back to the Project Endure podcast. It is episode 18. We have myself, Joe Rinaldi, and we have a very, very special guest up in New York, Beau Whitman. Beau, how's it going, man?
It's going great, man. Thanks for having me here tonight. I'm excited.
Of course. It was a no-brainer. So, for the people who are listening, we connected, I want to say it's probably been a little over a year, maybe like between a year and a half. And you were on the Pursuit podcast. We connected back then and we've stayed in touch since. And it's been a while since we talked, actually. So I'm really excited just to catch up, candidly. But why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners?
Sure. My name's Beau Whitman. I'm originally from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Yep, I know, right? Been in New York City coming up on my 9th year, which is crazy because, you're a true New Yorker after 10 years. So I'm excited. And then I'm leaving. But I was a professional athlete pretty much my whole life. I was a nationally ranked gymnast on the U.S. junior national team growing up, a nationally ranked, soccer, wrestler, track and field athlete, and then went into becoming a D1 athlete, and then kind of ventured off into animation and coaching at NYU and all different levels of people, just focusing on the whole background of like, what do you do after you get injured? But not along like daily working out or daily like limits. It's more about getting back into that high level training you used to be in. From there, I ended up getting diagnosed with cancer. And from that, I'm sure we'll dive into that. But after that, I created my own cancer program, which is one of the only programs that it is in the East Coast pretty much. And I've been working with hospitals all around the East Coast, trying to get it going and helping my community as best I can.
That's incredible, dude. We have so much to talk about, and
I love it.
I might as well just start with the first question because this will lead us to a lot. So the question I want to ask is, what is the hardest thing or circumstance that you've ever had to handle?
So it's interesting. Like a lot of people would say, like, like they heard just my briefing, they'd probably be like, oh, cancer, or they'd be like, they don't even know like the other injuries I've been through. But for me, and recently I kind of like, it's dawned on me what has been so hard. It's going back to normalcy, this normalization of what living is before cancer or before everything happened. And I was listening to a podcast the other day that talks about how there is no, like being normal is a myth, or going back to that normalization is a myth. And I think that's my hardest thing that I'm trying to encompass and like get myself out of, because after cancer, I was like, I got to get back to my life. I got to get back to what I'm doing. And no matter how hard I try, I can never get back to that position. Something's always off. If it's my body, if it's my mind, if it's the environment, if it's the world, like you just always something just changes and you can never control it. And when I read that quote the other day, I was like, wow, this is like the hard, like over cancer, over everything. I was like, this is something I've been trying to do, and I haven't like realized that I've been trying so hard, but it just never is going to happen. I have to like finally accept that.
I think this is a really interesting spin to where I thought this conversation was going to go, to be honest. And I want to dive in, but before we get there, why don't you rewind just a little bit and give kind of a brief background of what cancer was like, how that unfolded, maybe some of the struggles within that chapter itself, and then let's talk about what happens after.
Oh, of course. I think before I even dive into the cancer world, a little bit about my background before that would be, I had like since the age of 13 up until my cancer when I was 27, I was having surgeries every year and a half. And that was just from pretty much gymnastics. Like my gymnastics totaled my body. It was so bad. And like, it was a bet in my family. Okay, when's your next surgery? When is this? Like I've had double shoulder reconstruction on my left. I had it on my right. I had both my wrists reconstructed. I had my knee scoped in 2 places. And then like my 2 additional like cancer surgeries that I had. But like when I found out I had cancer, it was like during an Olympic weightlifting meet. And I was on my second to last clean, and I caught this clean and I felt like my back snapped. And I was like one of those things where like And if you're an athlete listening, you know this for a fact. Like you might be running and you roll an ankle and you'll take a couple steps. You'll be like, oh, no, it's fine. I can keep on playing. But there's that one time you roll and in your mind, you just know right away. You're like, shit, I'm done. Like you just know, like you definitely did it worse. I remember picking up the barbell and dropping it. And I was going through a lot of stuff at that point. Like I had a sinus infection. I popped my collarbone by 2 inches and my neck was swollen and I was down like 2 weight classes. And I was like, all right, I'm stressed. I'm tired. Like my back, I couldn't even walk for 3 days. I ended up having to call my parents and be like, I need someone to like pick me off the train. Like I'm barely crawling out of this train. Like someone needs to put me in a car and take me to the hospital. Like we're going to go see the doctor. And I remember the doctor being like, all right, your neck is swollen. That is not from a collarbone. That is not from something else. Like we need to go get scans. And it was funny because like the whole entire time, like I was looking at my mom, she picked me up. I was like, it's something bad. Like my back's broken. Like, my collarbone popped, like a piece of the bone chipped into it. And I ripped my shoulder again. Like I was in pain everywhere. Like my stomach was a mess. And I usually have like an ironclad stomach. And I'm like, back's a mess. I can't walk. And I was just laughing because I was like, it was literally on that 1.5 year date, the almost 2-year mark. I was like, of course, I like 9 months ago, I just had wrist reconstruction and now I'm hurt again. Like it was just the whole laugh. And at like 1 o'clock in the morning, we got these scans back and the doctor literally walked out and was like, there's no easy way to say this, but you have like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I sat there and it took me a second to process. And I was like, huh? Like come again? Like, trying to figure out like that's not at all what I thought. My mom got up, she used to work in a hospital in the ER and was just like, what? And he goes, yeah, I just got off the phone with the oncologist. You have stage 4 non-Hodgkin's. You probably have 9 months to live. And I immediately like sat up off the bed. I started laughing and my mom was like, this isn't funny. I'm like, come on, Mom. I'm like, look at and like the doctor's like, are you okay? Like what? Nobody reacts this way. Like, do I need to call psych? Do I like have to do this? I was like, buddy, you don't know my history. I was like, of course this is it. Like, this is a joke. And I like in my mind, I wasn't thinking it was that big of a thing. The next thing I was thinking of was half a block away is the Asplin Cancer Center in PA. Like, all right, am I going to get a biopsy? Am I being admitted tonight? Like I was already 10 steps ahead of everyone in the room because that's how my brain works. That's how it functions with all my other injuries. And it wasn't until like, I remember getting into the, into the car. But before that, like my mom went and looked at the scans and seeing her face go white. That's when I was like, all right, this is a little serious. But I remember getting in the car. I was like, I'm going to drive home. I'm going to drive home. My mom's like a mess. She's speechless. Like we don't know what's happening. And I just told her, I was like, listen, this isn't real until like there's an actual IV in my arm and my head is shaved and like we're going through this for real. We have no idea what's going to happen. We don't even have a biopsy yet. We don't even have anything. And I went 4 weeks. I actually like went four, almost 5 weeks with that diagnosis. So like the cancer center even told me that. They were like, hey, like it's right. Like you have that amount of time. And that's how I found out. And it was like, it was a lot going on. And like, I remember the first 2 people I called was like my ex from college and my best friend from college because they were my rocks. And I put them on a joint call. And I was like, all right, guys, first of all, Holden, I'm not coming to your proposal. I'm sorry. And he was like, you better be dying. And I was like, well, and my ex was just like, why am I on this call? We're still best friends, but like, why, like, what's going on? And I told them and they were like, ha, 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 ha. Like, this is really funny. Like jokes. And they hung up. And then like, 5 minutes later, I get a call back and they were texting each other like, this wouldn't be like happening if it was real. And they were like, okay, what's really going on? And I was like, I'm dying. Like, this is all I know. I'm not coming. I have to go through all these blood tests, all these scans, all this stuff. Like, this is what I know. Yeah, that's, and I think it was like after that 5th week, we got a random call that one of the people working on my blood found this like super rare, like mutation in the cells. And it turned out to be this mixture between testicular and non-Hodgkin. So it's a germ cell cancer. And it was great because like they were like, it's 100% curable. And I was like, oh, but like, I'm always waiting for that other foot to drop. It's this bad. Like, all right, there has to be a catch. It's a rare form. There's not that many types. And I just remember like the person being like, but you have to go through the worst amount of chemo. Also like the 2 surgeries you have to get, like are the worst that you're going to ever have. And I was like, well, define worse. And like, I remember asking like the surgeon just chuckled and he was just like, the surgeries that you had beforehand is like a candy bar compared to like, or like, you know, taking a stroll through the park compared to what you're about to go through.
Oh man.
So yeah.
Dude, just like out of sheer curiosity, I have a vague understanding, but the two surgeries, what was the gist there?
Yeah. So the first one was long name, retroperitoneal lymph node dissection. So they had to open me up from like my pelvic bone all the way up to like mid, like top of my stomach. And they had to remove everything from my pelvis, like all the lymph nodes all around everywhere. And then they had to open up my neck on my left side, pretty much from the back of my neck all the way up to my front of my collarbone, and take out all the lymph nodes that were all through my shoulder and my neck there as
Wow.
well.
What's the recovery like from a physical standpoint after those two surgeries?
Oh, it sucks. It sucks. Like, it's one of those things, like, you can say you're grateful for things, and everyone has this in their moment in life. It doesn't have to do with fitness or anything, but, or like in general, people will be like, wow, I'm grateful for having this one thing. And you could say, but you won't realize it until you're actually in that moment with that. Like for me, like I remember the doctor coming in being like, listen, this is going to be the hardest surgery for you because like I have to cut straight through all your abs. You used to be a gymnast, you were a wrestler, you were a vault, he was like, you have the strongest core I've ever seen, which makes sense. You're a gymnast. And he was like, you have to realize like your stomach is going to have to learn to brace, redo like everything ever under the sun, because it's not going to brace the same way ever again because of how we had to cut it open and staple it and do all that stuff. And I wasn't thinking about it. I was like, okay, my core is strong. When they put it back together, I'll be fine. And I remember Nick Pags came in the first day at like 4:00 in the morning. I woke up. I was in so much pain. I was crying my eyes out. And he walked in. I was just like, thank God. I was like, someone's. I was like, I need you to pick my ass up off this bed because they were like, you got to walk 12 laps. And I was like, okay. And it was one of those things where I like went even to sit up and I couldn't even sit up, even like using my arms to push myself up, my legs push up. And this is like, and even trying to walk, like it was like, you know, one arm on like the pulley thing that you like, you know, what has my meds on it. And then like, you know, the IV bags, and then one arm around Nick trying to walk. And it's like going one step every 5 minutes because how much pain you're in. And like I remember our conversation, he was just like, I bet squatting 400 5 times means nothing down to you, right? And I'm like, yep. I'm like, I don't even know what to do next. And it took a really, really long time because and I'm still dealing with those issues. I feel great. And like with my stomach, like I have a big chance of like getting a stomach hernia. And if I get one, like they had to reopen you have to redo stitches and all that stuff. And it could be a serious thing. So like every once in a while, like I'll be doing core and like a core routine that like, you know, I do like 30 crunches and I feel great normally in the past, but now if I get to 10, I'll cramp so hard. And that's just because of how the cancer is and all that and how like the surgery is. But it's a baby process, you know, it's all about, you know, the foundation and just building off that foundation gradually. There's no race in this. It's like, it's all about taking your time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Now, just for timeline's sake, so from when you got diagnosed at 27 to right now, how much time has passed?
2.5 years.
2.5 years. Wow. So you're really not even that far removed from the whole experience.
No. Yeah, not at all.
So what's it been like?
I even just came from scans. That was the funny part. I just came from getting like my x-rays and like my CTs and blood work done today.
Wow. And did you get results? Everything good?
No, yeah. I find out like tomorrow. So they usually get, and then the next day it tells you.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, fingers crossed. Now, so you got through those surgeries, down the path of recovery. At what point did you begin to start really feeling better? Just overall, not even physically, just overall about the situation. And then what was it like from that point where you started feeling better to where you are right now?
I think it has to be answered in 2 parts. Like you kind of like divide it, I know, but I think it needs to be divided just so like people can understand from like a cancer point of view well, it's the thing. Whenever I work with cancer patients, like I tell them from the day you're diagnosed, you're a survivor. Because what are you doing while you're going through it? You're surviving through cancer. So like from day one, I remember I was already in my notebook trying to decide, okay, what's my timeline? What am I going to do? Like when I found out I only had 9 months, I had a yellow notebook page out and I wrote down all 6 of my siblings. And I was writing down what I was going to do with every single one of them. When I found out I was going to live, I was like, okay, what's my way of getting back. How am I going to go back to Olympic weightlifting? How am I going to compete nationally? Like, what are my steps? Reaching out, who do I have to reach out to? And it was like, what programming am I going to do? I was already on those next steps, and that put me in a better place. I was already like in that physical drive. And I kept myself occupied because I found that there's no programs. There's nothing for high level athletes. It was like, go back to what you're doing. That's it. And I was just like, no. And like, I remember like the last day I was cured, like they were like, all right, you're in remission. And I remember asking my doc, I was like, all right, I've been asking this for a year and a half. What am I allowed to do? And he was like, go back to whatever you're doing. And I was like, oh, so I can go to the gym. And I was an asshole about it. My mom even was laughing across the room, screaming at me, but it was like, oh, I can put on 400 and go squat it for 5 again. Like, and he was like, absolutely not. I'm like, well, and there's no guidelines of this, but I was great once that was going on. And like during the battle, I think it's after where I kind of fell in a pit hole of like biting off too much that I could chew with, like getting back to the city right away, getting back into the coaching. Cause I used to coach like 30 classes a week, and I used to be an animator, and I used to have 6 jobs. I was running all over the place. And I knew within the first 2 weeks of being back, I was like, this is impossible. Like, I have to schedule naps now. I have to change my whole diet. Like, I feel like an old person. My body hurts every single day. It was like, you know, going down this list of like, what's next? How do I have to readjust? How do I have to do things? And I went into a very bad place, you know, when I moved back to the city in terms of like pain, in terms of mental health management. And I started like seeing like, not depression, there's more like a pain management person because of all my surgeries and like how much weight I lost. I went from weighing like 175, 180 pounds of solid muscle with like 8% body fat to 150 pounds with like 20% body fat because I like lost all my muscle. And like all my metal, all my anchors were just not feeling well in my body anymore. And it was amazing how I started off so well and then went back into this like regression. And then once I found my place in terms of like that program I started and helping out others and talking to more cancer patients every day and trying to find that in between of what to do next and reaching out to high level athletes and helping them, it kind of got me back on track, kind of got me back into that, you know, that place. It found me back to my roots of whatever, you know, I was supposed to do kind of.
Yeah. Hey, so do you think that for you, a big part of the recovery process and moving back toward, I'm going to put this in air quotes, a more normal life almost required that sense of connection and a sense of fulfillment that came from doing something that was just bigger than you?
Yeah. I mean, I was talking about this today with my one friend. We were chatting about different things. I met her at this giant competition that I had, and she was just like, hey, I've heard a lot about you. I just have one question. It was basically what you just asked. And she was like, how do you know, like, this is what you're supposed to be doing in life? And I was like, listen, everyone, you know, has a meaning in life. Everyone has a purpose. It might take them, you know, 90 years to find it. It might take them 2 years. I knew after my second surgery when I was 15, what my like passion, what my goal in life was, and like what my like purpose. And like when I told my parents, they were just like stunned. They were like, we could see that. Like, this is great. And every single year going forward, it's all I've been dedicating myself to. And it's all about how when I got injured my first time, I blew out my shoulder when I was 13. When I had to get my other one done when I was 14, I didn't have a big following on Instagram, but people were like looking at my recovery process and how I was doing it different than the others. And like my doctors were like, you'll never handstand again. You'll never snatch again. You'll never do this again. And then like a year and a half later, I was snatching 200 at 145 pounds. I was like handstanding still, doing all these crazy stuff. And people were like, how are you doing this? And it became like my saying, I rebuilt myself to inspire others. And that's like the name of my program. And I realized like after the first 2 times, I was like, okay, this is a cool saying. And then when I had my third surgery, I was like, okay, it's a coincidence. After the 4th one, I was like, okay, we're getting somewhere. And then like 6 surgeries later, I was like, okay, well, can we stop the signs? Like, I understand, like every surgery I post about it, I talk about it. Like, this is my goal, to help people like recover after these injuries. And then, you know, the cancer hit. And I remember telling my parents right away, I was like, my whole life is dedicated to cancer now. Like, this is the sign. Like, all these surgeries prepared me mentally, physically, and like programming wise for this moment. And I know after and it was the best feeling in the world, because I remember I was like sitting on my laptop when I thought of this idea, and I was like, there's probably so many programs out there. Like, I can't be the first one. Like, there's no way. And then I Googled and there was zero. There was like the YMCA program.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is amazing. I was like, I'm going to be the first. I'm changing. This is destiny at first. And like, everything happens for a reason. My mom always says, I'm always a big believer in that. So when that happened, I was like, this is what we're going to do. This is what's going to happen. And that's what was like my driving factor. It's since I was 13, it's been.
I have a few things here. So one, it's really amazing to just hear and feel through the camera how passionate you are about all of this. Two, it sounds like your parents were really rocks for you, not only through this process, but just in growing up and developing the mindset that you have. And three, when you go back through your history all those times, obviously there are a lot of physical injuries, but with any physical injury comes mental, emotional change and struggle. And so your life almost seems like this up and down cycle of, thriving, setback, thriving, setback, thriving, almost preparing you in a sense for the cancer. I mean, when you look back at your journey, do you feel like all of those previous setbacks actually set you up to be super, super resilient through this process?
Well, 100%. I mean, in so many different facets. It wasn't just mentally, it wasn't just physically. It also came down to like this weekend I was at Wadapalooza. I was one of the head staff there, and I work with all the athletes. My job is pretty much putting out anything that goes wrong. But I remember looking at like the RX division and being like, I could easily be there. Or the elite division, I was like, I could have made, if I didn't have cancer, I would be right there alongside them. And I know a lot of the elite athletes. I used to train with some of them. And it would be really funny seeing them like work out and like hitting a 245 snatch, 270 snatch. And I'd be sitting there and be like, yeah, I used to be able to do that. And it's funny because like I remember like during the warm up area, I said that during, like jokingly, like I was like, I remember when I could do that. And like two of the elite athletes were like okay, yeah. And like three of my best friends that are elite athletes were like, yeah, dude, that one time you came in that gym, like cold and snatched, like power snatched 240, like I remember that. And like they all were like, oh wait, what's the story behind this then? Like this makes no sense. And it comes to that point where I was like, it doesn't bother anymore. I know most people would sit there and just be sitting back and be like, man, I wish I could pick up that bar. Like I remember like when an ollie bar used to weigh like a toothpick, and now like it weighs like 1,000 pounds, but it will come, it will get there. Like I'm in that same point right now. Like I'm at the point where I'm allowed to go full out training, but I blew up my wrist again. So I have surgery this February.
Oh my
on my wrist. I know, it's so bad. It's so bad. I made a promise to my parents that if I hit 10 surgeries, I'm done with fitness. I'm moving somewhere. I'm going to get on a dive boat and just work on a dive boat. That's what I'm going to do.
What number is the risks?
This will be 9. This will be my 9th surgery total. Yeah.
All right. So you're on your last chance here. So,
much.
With that being said, before we move on, Beau, why don't we talk a little bit about the cancer recovery program? Because I want to hear more about that. And I would imagine that a lot of the principles apply to not just cancer recovery, but could be extrapolated to other facets of life.
100%. I think the biggest takeaway is, people, like, again, I always relate to athletes because I feel like a lot of these podcasts that I'm on, there's a ton of athletes that are on there. And some of you can relate, like you get hurt and you go, okay, I'm going to go see the doctor. You go see a PT, they send you to somebody that's in physical therapy. But the problem and like, I have nothing against physical therapists. They go through so much, they have so much knowledge. The issue that I have with them is that they have no sports background, some of them, or they try to rehabilitate you for normal life, not what you have to get back into. And some of that stuff that you're doing for recovery doesn't prepare you for what you really need. Mm-hmm. And that was really big for me. And I remember before the cancer, like I was working with, like I was at NYU. I was the head jumps coach there. And I remember when I left that last year, I was working with like 10 nationally ranked high school athletes that either blew out their shoulder, blew out the wrist, blew out the knee in different sports, like soccer, wrestling, track and field, a lot of track athletes, because they did the same thing I did. They blew out their shoulder, had to take a post-grad year, did this. And I knew a lot of D1 coaches in the area, and they knew about my program. I did it in college, and they were like, yo, go see this guy right now. Go take a gap year, go work with this guy, and then come back. because he did that. He took a year off. He ended up jumping like 2 feet higher and he got a full ride to college. So I did that. And then when I found out about the cancer, I was like, okay, what's the disconnect here? It's the same thing. People are going in for like the cancer, rehab. And it's one, there's not a lot on fitness right now because 90% of the doctors out there don't want people working out. And that's true. Like I had a mass that was on my aorta and he was like, if your blood pressure goes too high, you're going to pop it. And then, you're dead in 2 minutes. So I didn't work out. I like stayed back. I just chilled. Other people are allowed to though. And it's finding that way around it. Like ACE has this amazing program that I just went through, and I'm actually going through the second part that just came out for an advanced study in it for a certification as a cancer specialist. But the biggest disconnect is the mental side. When you're going in and working with a coach, and I have 2 physical PT places in the city that I'm meeting with next week that work with a ton of cancer patients. And it was interesting because they didn't know I was a cancer survivor. They were like, you look fit, you look strong. We know you're a trainer. We never would have guessed you went through this whole entire thing because your presence, how your mindset is, all that. And I sat down with them and I was like, what's the biggest disconnect that you see? And they're like, we cannot relate to them. Like we can say you're doing it for this reason, but they're just super quiet. They don't want to open up. And I was like, that's why my program works, because they're talking to me, someone that's been through it, someone that's done it. And I have 2 other people that work with me that are nutritionists, and they're also cancer survivors. So it's great when we get on these calls. Like I have 2 things. I do one-on-ones and then I do groups. And like every 3 months I'll do like a group like call / program where it's 90 days and they get to work together. And like my last one was in September and I had 20 people in it, and I had everything ranging from colon cancer, skin cancer, liver, breast cancer, like anything you can imagine, like all under the sun. It was great because like I would get on a call and we would start talking, and I was kind of like narrating it to be like, let's not have a death. Like, let's not talk about death. Let's talk about mental. Let's talk about the workouts. Let's talk about the nutrition. Let's talk about not being normal anymore. Let's talk about getting away from this outside thing. And it was like, sometimes I'd be like, guys, I'm signing off. It's been 3 hours. I was like, you guys can stay on if you want, but like, that's the deal. And it's great because that connection is so real. And I think it's very hard for most people to actually find that. But my program and the mental side focused on that. I have a nutrition side for it, for a nutritionist that focuses on all the different types of cancer, which is amazing. And then my other side is the physical side. And it's all surrounding, which is amazing, like my gymnastics foundation. It all comes down to that foundational work. Because after you go through chemo, after you go through everything, like your lungs are shot, you can't even do a push-up. So what do? You start all over from the basics again, and you build it from there. And like that 3 months is all about just building up that foundation. So by the end of 3 months, you can go take a Barry's class. You can go take a Soul Cycle class, hopefully, or you can go start doing your own lifting.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it sounds like what you've really built through it all is something that's holistic and something that has a sense of community. And I think that sense of community is just so important. I would imagine, especially for cancer survivors, but just in general for anybody who's going through a struggle or going through a change. And, with that being said, Beau, as you are doing the coaching now, getting back into things and moving forward, I want to ask you another question similar to the first, but a little bit different. I want to ask you, what's the hardest thing that you've ever done on purpose? Because so far we've talked about hard things that you didn't really have a say in. Now I want to ask you about hard things that you've actually pursued on purpose and why. Why have you done those things?
Well, I know the answer, but it's kind of like, I think it's going back into fitness. I mean, I've told myself after every injury, I have told myself, and like Nick Pags will swear by this. I remember getting out of that bed and walking around, and I was crying, not because of the pain. I was just like, I'm done. I'm leaving the city. I'm done with fitness. I can't do this. And he was just like, why? And I'm like, because I told you, like, if I get another surgery, I'm done with fitness. And he goes, no. That's not what you said. He said, before cancer, I remember this to this day. He was like, if you get hurt again doing fitness or competing in fitness, then it doesn't count. And I was like, I did get hurt. He goes, you did not get, fitness did not give you cancer. He was like, that does not work that way. And that was a big thing, mental block. And it's still a mental block. And I've been dealing with it. I haven't touched a barbell in 8 months, except yesterday, actually. Yesterday was my first day squatting in 8 months. And I could barely walk upstairs. It was crazy.
It's the best feeling, though.
Yeah, it is the best feeling. And I forgot about it, but it was more about like, my wrist was screwed up. Like my stomach was a mess with everything going on. I had a couple of cancer scares here and there. It was just like, do I really put myself back out there? But then I realized, I was like, I need to do this, because what have I been doing since I was 13? Every time I fell off my bike, I get back on. Every time I get hurt, I get back on. And I'm like going against my whole practice, going against this whole thing I preach if I don't get out there and move. Don't get out there. But the thing I realized is it doesn't have to be back to that normalization that I had what lifting was. I don't have to lift at that high level anymore. I don't have to go in the gym and try and snatch that weight or clean and jerk that weight, or even just run that 5-minute mile. I can go in and just move for a half hour and do whatever I want. And that will still count as me, staying in shape.
Yeah. What does fitness mean to you, Beau? I mean, it's obviously played a huge role in your life. And I know it means a little bit something different to every single person, but for you, what does fitness mean?
For me personally, I think it's having your body healthy enough to not be in pain. And we talked about it earlier, how when I lost all that weight, the anchors in my body, I have like 2 pounds of metal in my body, and that was like fit for when I was that large person. But now that I'm not that large person, I'm in pain every single day. And every day where I missed the gym, I would feel it the next day. It wasn't just like a mental note, oh man, well, this sucks. But my body would remind me when I wake up in the morning. So like me personally, like fitness in general is like being able to stay healthy while moving, doing the simplest movements, the functional movements that we do every day.
Yeah. And it sounds like that's something that you truly didn't understand just how precious it was to be able to do even just the basics until they were taken away from you. What would you say to somebody who's never lost the ability to perform physically, somebody who's never, had to relearn how to walk or relearn how to do a push-up? Because I think it's really hard to imagine, right? We could hear a story and you could say, yeah, I could imagine, I could guess that's gotta be really hard. But until you go through it, I feel like it's gotta be totally different.
It's true. I mean, we do it daily though. We do these, think about a new job we start, think about a book we read. We start from the beginning with a book. We start reading and we're like curious about it. We're like, where is it going? We put the book down, we put it off to the side, and we pick it up later. You're like, oh, I kind of really want to finish this book. And by the time you get to the end of the book, you're like, wow, that was great. I learned all this. That's like the same thing in terms of like the say if you're learning a new language. I start one day, wow, this is hard. I'm going to take a break. All right, I'm going to try and pick it back up. I think that's like a good small example, like incubator level, but once it puts you into that shock of real life of what it really is, you won't know. Yeah. And I think what you need to do is really step outside of that realm. And if people want to dive more into it, all you have to do is look around and you'll see people that are going through things similar to that, or talk to someone that's going through cancer, or talk to someone that's maybe lost their job, lost a loved one, and all that. And you can really get your perspective once you take yourself out of your own shoes with it.
Yeah. And to that point, I think it's easy to live in our own mind, between our own ears, and whatever we're going through, imagine that we are the only person in the world experiencing that when we are going through the low points. And it all it takes sometimes is to look around and have some honest and open conversations to realize that, okay, maybe for you it was cancer. Maybe for me, it's losing eyesight. Maybe for somebody else, it's losing a loved one. We all go through really dark, hard, and challenging times. It's part of what it means to be human. And I think it's really beautiful when people can open up about that, have vulnerable conversations, and then go a step further and lend support to the people around them, build community, and use their life as an example to get up every single day, to continue to push limits and do hard things. Because to be honest, the thing that gets me out of bed every morning is just knowing that my actions, even the ones in private, even the small actions and choices, decisions, those are changing the person that I'm becoming. And just for that fact, it's affecting people in my life. And so I think what you're saying is really resonating with me, Beau. And I'm curious, what is next for you when it comes to challenge and getting back into fitness? I mean, is it a competition? Is it just getting to the gym consistently? Like, what does that look like practically for you?
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna take a pause of the fitness. I don't know if you knew, but I was at a boxing match. I had my first amateur boxing match,
Tell
and
us.
like, so, oh my God, I remember this conversation. It was like July, and I had a group. It's called Haymaker for Hope. They approached me, and they were like, "Hey, you should do this. This would be amazing." And I'm sitting there. I'm like this would be fun. I've always wanted to fight. I'm so down. But then I was thinking, I said yes. I filled out the forms, and as I filled them out, I hit send. It was like, once you're in, you're in. You can't back out. Like, that's part of the guidelines. I even read the small lines, and then I realized, well, I probably should have cleared this with my doctor. Probably should have cleared this with my family. I'm sitting there, and then I get the email, like 4 days later, because I forget about it. It's like, you've been accepted. Like, we're gonna announce your name everywhere. Blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, probably fucked. Like, we'll find out. Didn't tell my parents until like they announced it like everywhere. And my dad was just like, this is amazing. And you could just see my mom in the background just like pondering it. And she was like, okay. She was fine with it. She was 100% fine. It was baffling. I did not think I was going to live past that. But I remember my doctor being like, why? He was just like, you just beat cancer like less than a year ago. Why are you putting yourself through all this training? And like, it was like a full 4 rounds, like 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes each. I ended up knocking my kid out in the third round, which is dope. And that's where I screwed my wrist up. I screwed up training for that, not even punching somebody. I was like training with the dumbbell and my wrist popped in 3 places. And it's like, I fought with a bummed wrist. It was like a mess, but it was an amazing experience. And I was just like, let's see what's up next. And during that time, I put my cancer program on pause. Because I wanted to do more research on how I can do better, how I can get connected more with the cancer world. Because a lot of people are just still terrified to go into this world. And I realized with that, I wanted to focus more on my program. Was like the youngest person I had was 18. I had someone that was 72 that was in my program too, which is amazing. And a part of me wanted to even go farther with that and try and go with like the younger people. And I have, I can't announce it yet, but there's more depth I'm going to. I might be running like one of the first cancer program for kids in hospitals, which I'm very excited about. And I'm starting to work more with hospitals and kind of get through that red tape, which is very exciting. And I kind of, my next steps are like trying to figure out in the fitness world to try and be more of a symbol for the cancer like community. Because if you look around, there's not that many people that are representing it. There's no Nike master trainer. There's no Adidas person. There's no nobody for like anything. And my goal, like right now on the East Coast, is be known as that person that people can come to, like point in the right direction and do things for. So those are like my dreams and goals.
You've got a lot on your plate and it's all incredibly meaningful. So, as we talk about cancer, as we talk about survivorship, as we talk about fitness, all these things that are, once they become part of our journey, they stay with us for life, right? In some way, shape, or form. So the question I want to ask you really is a simple one. And it's, what does the word endurance mean to you?
For me, it's so hard thinking about what it is besides the actual term. Like you say endurance, I'm like, wow, running. I'm like thinking I'm jumping. I'm like thinking of all that. But I mean, I think it comes back. I think endurance plays so hard with grit and resilience. Very important. But it comes back to, I believe, like your soul and just who you are in general. And by endurance, it's those days you wake up and you want to do something and then you put it off and then you roll out of bed. You're like, no, I have to do this. I have to do this. And it's like, everyone has that one thing they know they have to get out of bed for. They will always do, or something like that. It's like us when we get up at 4 a.m. every day and we text each other. And then we finally say, okay, maybe 4:30. Okay, maybe 5. And we keep pushing it back, but we still get up early. We still text each other. We still work through our things. I think that endurance to keep on going for like who we are, and those our dreams and our goals, even though they change, it's that inner drive that we have, that fire, that internal fire. Let's put it that way. That will never go out.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious for you when you realized you had this internal fire, because it's very clear just by the way you speak about everything we've talked about that you have that fire inside of you. When did you realize that? Because obviously you've always been an active person, but when did you realize you had that fire, so to speak?
I mean, I think it goes back to when I was like 15. I had someone approach me, and he was
Yeah.
just like, it was a coach in the gym, like some random coach, and he was just like a high school coach, and I was like visiting my brother. We went to different high schools. I was visiting. The coach was just like, "Hey, man, like you're 15 years old, and you know things that you should not know in terms of like PT, in terms of lifting." He was like, "You're very knowledgeable." He was like, "What have you gone through?" And I started talking to him, and he was just like, "You should just come here and teach."
Hmm.
So a 15-year-old, I was just like, well, I will end up doing that. And like, I ended up coaching outside. I ended up doing other things. I ended up teaching myself things. And it was always that. And I remember like I remember one day, like my parents were talking to me, and like one of my really good friends was just like, we're out like drinking, like 8 of us, and they all were talking about going to all these crazy places. And I was like, I can't afford that. I'm not going to go. And my one friend, I remember after we were walking behind everyone, he was like, let me ask you something. He was like, you used to be an animator. Like you were making like 200,000 a year. Like you had a really great job, and then you just left it, and now you just coach. And you make like not even a tenth of that. He was like, you don't make anything. He was like, why? And I was like, 720. I was like, that is why. And he was like, what? And I was like, 720. That's what reminds me. He's like, what's 720? I was like, I did the math for 6 months straight, and I would take a random week out of the year when I had a full schedule. That's how many people that I coached in 1 week. That's how many lives I touched in 1 week. That's how many people I saw and helped get through their pain, get through their anger. And it was like every day, every Friday, every Sunday, whenever I was struggling, being like, why am I doing this? Why am I so tired? I had it written on this big whiteboard in my room. It was like 720. And I always say it to myself, 720 or whatever it was that month, 700, 600. It's like that many people I was able to help work out, train, get through like all their grief. Like, why do you go work out? You go to release the stress. Like I was helping them, even though it didn't seem like I was, but like at the end of the day, like that was more meaningful to me than like the whole making so much money.
Yeah, we kind of glossed right over that transition in your life. But just because, I made a similar transition, different in a lot of ways, but left my full-time job because I felt like I could make a more unique and meaningful impact on more people, quite frankly, than I could at that job. And it was hard for a number of reasons. And for you, right, you already touched on a few reasons why it might not have made sense from somebody looking from the outside as to why you left. But was there a struggle there when you left?
No,
And
absolutely. And then no. At first, because I was like, I love animation. I love drawing. I was a big spray painter. I was in gaming. I was in like TV show, like different types of things for animation. And, I was like all about the fitness world. And I knew the fitness community very well, some like the top trainers. And I remember it was just like one day someone at my work at the animation job was just like, best advice I've ever got. He was just like, look around your room right now. Like, look around. I was like, you look so upset. I was like, I am upset. I'm so tired. Like, I don't know what to do. And he was like, look around. How old are you? I'm like 22, 23. He was like, everyone around here is in their 40s. He was like, you are the youngest person by 20 years. He was like, animation isn't going anywhere. It's changing every single 6 months to a year. You're already in it. He was like, you could easily get back in it whenever you want. He was like, that's the best part about it. The hardest part is getting in. He was like, leave, go enjoy your life, go live your life. Because like the work hours, most people don't realize you're in at 7:00 and you leave at 9:00. You're sitting at a cubicle all day, staring at a screen. And then like you have one person next to you, or you're just sitting by yourself. And then your meetings are all on Zooms. Like you're barely in a room or anything like that. And it's like, by that time, like, you get off at 9, it's all right, I'm going to go work out. Well, no gym's really open. So, okay, I'm going to work out at 5 a.m. So that means you're up at 4 a.m. every day. You go work out. And those hours, like after 6 months, I was just like tired. Like my physical drive wasn't there. Nothing was there. I didn't see what I was doing was meaningful, even though the program and everything I was working at was like really cool for all these different people we were going to help. And it was just like, I need to take a step away and just be like, I need to go coach. I need to go back to my roots of what I love doing.
You know what? It's so interesting that this part of your story came before the cancer part, because I would imagine for most people, cancer could almost serve as a wake up call where, life is short, life is precious. and you have to make the most of every moment. And it's cool that you realized and then acted on that way before cancer ever came into your life.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are plenty of people listening to this podcast who are just out there wishing, right? Like, must be nice to be able to kind of switch jobs and just go after what you want, or they're feeling the same things you felt, lack of drive, lack of fulfillment. They're just not happy. What would you say to the person who's not doing what they want to do because maybe they're scared of what other people think, or scared of, the financial risk, or scared of whatever it is, the people who just aren't acting on it? What would you say to those people? I'm curious.
Be vulnerable. I mean, that's exactly what I did. I used to run this thing, and I'm actually bringing it back next month. I used to do Vulnerability Monday. I was like 15 seconds of vulnerability 15. And it's on my Instagram still. Like, you can see the posts of people posting about it, and your story is 15 seconds long. So I tell people to start posting on it. And this is also around the same time when that whole slogan of asking for a friend.
Yeah.
You know how it'd be like, does anyone know like the best like donut place around, asking for a friend, but really you're asking for yourself? Be vulnerable. I remember I went to my Instagram. I only had 1,000 followers or like 500 followers. And I was like, anybody know who's hiring for gymnastic specialists and Olympic weightlifting specialists, or like physical therapy for injuries? I remember putting it on my Instagram every single day for a week. And I had 4 gyms reach out to me being like, we have an opening. It's part-time. It's low pay. And I remember just being like, okay, let me do the math of all 4. I was like, if I worked full-time with all 4 of these jobs, I could still live in my apartment, barely make enough to eat, ramen noodle soup probably, and like, make it work out. And I was like, screw it, let's do it. I remember throwing everything out. I did the transition phase and just went all out. I learned so much in the fitness world, got all these certifications, and just met the right people at the right time. And it was all because I was vulnerable enough to just put my name out there, go out there and go after it. And I think that's the biggest thing with vulnerability. People forget that it's not showing your weakness. It's more about showing what you want to do, opening up your heart to others, or that fire, that internal fire we're talking about. Because the more you open that and let the air, the bigger it's going to grow, the more it's going to spread. That's why with vulnerability, when you open up to anyone, it vibrates, or forget the word that I'm looking for, ripple effect.
Yeah.
It'll ripple to everyone else.
Yeah. And I would even go a step further to say that shared vulnerability is trust, right? We can build trust with people through shared vulnerability, but it takes one person to start that. And that's why I appreciate what you do so much, Beau, whether it's, speaking on a podcast and having a conversation like this, or putting yourself out there on social media, or just out in the real world with real people, making a big difference for people who are struggling through cancer survival, getting back to life after that whole battle, right? Because I'd imagine a battle is a pretty accurate way to describe it. And you actually already answered kind of the last question, which is, what is one message you would have for somebody who's really going through a dark time in their life? And, the vulnerability aspect of what you just talked about really fits there. But I'm wondering if you have anything else, right? Anything you would say to somebody on the other end of this podcast who's just at rock bottom, just got a diagnosis, just lost a loved one, just lost a job, right? That person who just doesn't know where to turn next, what you would say to that person?
This is going to sound so screwed up, but I'm going to say it anyway. I've never really talked about this before. I don't know why this popped in my head, but I would say kind of like laugh it off, but like laugh in the sense of like where you're at in perspective of everyone, not everyone, but yourself. You're at that rock bottom. I remember when I was in college, I went through one of the hardest mental challenges of my life. It was because of how much pain I was in with all my surgeries. My body wasn't adjusting. I was going through all this stuff. Doctors couldn't figure out. And it was like, I'm allergic to most pain medicine. So it was like, I can't go on them. I couldn't do anything. And I was like drinking a lot, and I stopped drinking. And then it was like, okay, how am I going to like deal with this pain, no matter how much PT you do, and I remember with pole vaulting, if you guys don't know what that is, it's a giant pole you stick at the ground and jump over a giant bar. I remember every time before I jump, like it was like 10 seconds of pain, and like wasn't that much of pain, but then at the end of the day, I'd be in so much pain. But I remember every time, whenever I was in a lot of pain, or whenever I was scared of going up a pole, I would like stand at the end of the runway. I would like juggle the pole in my hand, and I would just start laughing, and I would say the same thing every time. Well, Only way I can go is up. It can't get any worse. I've done everything physically possibly wrong that you could do. I missed the mat. I shattered poles. I've been splintered by poles. I've been stabbed by poles. Like, I've done everything possibly wrong. And I always use that whenever I get to a dark phase, just like with the cancer story that I told you. When I found out I had cancer, I laughed. And I was like, all right, what's next? Like, and I think that's how people should, take whatever, if you need a minute, you need 30 seconds, like cry it out. And I'm not saying not to cry. I'm just saying, trying to open up that fire and be like, all right, this is it. What's next? What's going to happen? Reach out to somebody that's been in that situation before and be like, how do we do this now?
Yeah. And to me, right, we have a lot in common. I didn't even realize I pole vaulted as well. And I've had my fair share of injuries and whatnot, but I'm not a big laugher, and looking back at life, I think there are moments where I probably could have used some laughter. And to me, it's almost this maybe metaphor or a way to kind of make tangible the feeling of, like, well, is that all you got, right? To life. Is that all you got? And instead of asking the question, why me, asking the question, why not me? Right.
Yeah.
Because if you're being given a struggle, if you're being given a challenge, hardship, whatever it is, you're being given that because you can handle it. And I think everything you've said here tonight, Beau, is really going to resonate with a lot of people. And I want people to be able to connect with you and find you. So if people wanted to do those things, where would they go for that?
They can find me on Instagram at beau.whitman. So it's beau.whitman. Or they can go to my website, which is beauwhitman.com, which has all my stuff about the cancer program on it and everything that I'm up to right now.
Awesome, Beau. Well, I will link those things down in the description to make it easy for people to find. And just want to say that I appreciate who you are, what you're about. And thank you so much for this conversation.
Of course, man. Thanks for the opportunity. It's been amazing.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Project Indoor podcast, go ahead and subscribe, leave a review on your platform of choice, and share this episode with a friend. It helps us get more conversations like this out to more people like you. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you next time. Oh, and one more thing. If you're looking for a community of people all striving to be better together, check out the Project Indoor Hard Things Club. The link is in the description below. We'd love to have you.